Dead of shadows. She stood with bloodied hands in the middle of the room and didn't know what to do. I heard this story not from a police report, but from an old fisherman named Kim-sun in a port bar called the Lighthouse on the outskirts of Busan. The air there was thick with the smell of dried squid, fried scallops, and a quiet, salty sorrow. He told it in a whisper, burning his lips with murky soju, his face a map of wrinkles charting stormy seas, turned toward the past, to that very night, to that very house. But to understand the horror of what happened, you must first know the beauty that preceded it. You must see the city as it was. Busan back then wasn't just a city. It was a living being, breathing steam from bowls of ramen illuminated by neon hieroglyphs of signs reflected in puddles from the recent rain. The streets descended toward the ocean in stone terraces, and in the alleys of the old district, Chagulcheon, life pulsed fiercely. And in the very heart of this district lived Soli. Soli was the daughter of the owner of a tiny shop selling silk flowers. Her hands, thin and skillful, could make a piece of silk blossom into a perfect peony or a delicate lotus. She was quiet as a shadow cast by a paper lantern, and as beautiful as the first snow on pine branches. Her laughter was like the chime of porcelain bells, and her eyes held all the depth and mystery of the East Sea. She loved to watch the sunset from the hill, where an old, half-ruined pavilion stood, and she dreamed of the sea, so close, so infinite. But every story has its shadow, and the shadow of this one was Kwon De-hyun. He didn't live in Chagulcheon. He reigned there, like a spider at the center of his gloomy web. His office, located in a damp basement with perpetually fogged-up windows, was the place where last hopes went to die. It always smelled of old money, damp paper, and broken promises. De-hyun himself, clad in expensive but tasteless suits, was a parody of a successful man. His face, bloated with smug complacency, held a permanent grimace of mild contempt, and his small, shiny, bead-like eyes saw in people not souls, but merely leaky wallets in need of his salvation. Soli's father fell gravely ill. Money was needed for treatment, for expensive medicine from China. And Soli, her heart squeezed in a vice of fear, crossed the threshold of De-hyun's basement. He gave her the money, with a smile that made blood run cold. At interest rates that grew like bamboo after the rain. She signed the papers without reading, seeing only a phantom hope for her father's salvation. But her father died. The hope died with him. Only the debt remained, a debt that turned into a monster devouring her life piece by piece. De-hyun came every evening. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten directly. He sat on the threshold of her now empty shop, which smelled no longer of silk but of dust and despair, and held quiet, vile conversations. He talked about debt, about honor, about how easily it could all be resolved. He calculated the interest out loud, and each number hit her face like a slap. He suggested alternative payment methods, and his gaze, sliding over her fragile figure, was more offensive than any shout. The colors of Chagulcheon faded for Soli. The neon lights now seemed like the death throes of fireflies. The smell of the ocean began to reek of rotten seaweed and hopelessness. Her beautiful hands, which once created flowers, now only clenched helplessly into fists of powerlessness. And then that evening came. De-hyun arrived with a final ultimatum. Either she became his credit manager and helped collect debts from other unfortunates like herself, or he would take the shop, the house, and the one remaining memory of her father, his old master silk cutter. He sat at the table in her house, a thick folder of IOUs on his knees, sipping with pleasure the tea she had poured him with trembling hands. He talked, and she looked out the window where a cold autumn rain had begun, washing the color from the city, turning it into a black and white nightmare. And it was at that moment, through the sound of the rain, that she heard it. A quiet crying. A woman's crying. It came from right behind De-hyun, from the dark corner of the room where an old mirror hung in a cracked frame. Solly turned and saw her, a shadow in the mirror. A tall, slender figure in a traditional wedding hanbok, once scarlet, now faded, to the color of dried blood. Her face was hidden by a veil of long, wet hair, from which seawater dripped onto the floor, forming a dark puddle. From beneath the veil came that same quiet, soul-chilling weep. Dae-hyun saw nothing. He continued to mumble something about percentages. The figure in the mirror slowly raised its hand, a pale, almost transparent hand. In its fingers was her father's, very same silk cutter. The blade glinted coldly in the dim lamplight, and Solly understood. This was not a vision. It was an offer, an invitation. The hand reached out, offering her the cutter through the mirror across the boundary between worlds. And everything that was left of Solly, the pain, the bitterness, the rage, burst out. She stopped thinking. She ceased to be herself. She was merely a vessel for ancient vengeance. She took the cutter. Her fingers closed around the handle with such force that her knuckles turned white. And then there was only flesh. Fabric. A scarlet splash on the wall which her clouded consciousness, still holding the memory of hands that created beauty, instinctively shaped into the only familiar symbol. A sun. A bloody sun. And when it was over, the spirit, the mask of her rage receded. The whirlpool of madness subsided, and she was left standing alone, in the middle of the room that was no longer her home, with bloodied hands clutching the cutter, and with an absolute all-consuming void inside. She didn't understand what had happened. She didn't remember. She only remembered the crying. That quiet, inconsolable weeping of the bride which would now sound in her ears until the end of her days. Old Kim-sun finished his soju and looked at me. That's how ghosts are born, son. Not from graves. They are born from our cruelty. We create the monsters ourselves, and then we are surprised when they come to collect payment. The weeping bride. She is just the answering pain. A mirror, reflecting our own vileness. He left, leaving me alone with this story, but the most terrible part began after. Because I owe someone too. And my creditor isn't so different from the late Kwon Dae-hyun. And last night I woke up to the sound of water dripping outside my window, even though there was no rain. And I thought I saw a reflection in the glass, not my own, but another, with a shroud of wet hair. And now I'm not afraid of bailiffs. I'm afraid of quiet alleys where puddles reflect the sky with unnatural clarity. I'm afraid to look into shop windows late at night when the street is empty, and in the dark glass behind your reflection, another might appear, pale, with a veil of wet hair. And the most terrible thing, I've started to notice others, like me, with empty eyes and trembling hands. We recognize each other in a crowd by that look, the look of people who have seen the true face of justice and realized it is far more terrifying than any injustice. We don't say a word. We just silently look away because we know. Each of us has a debt, and sooner or later, someone will come for each of us to offer a deal. And now I wait. I wait for my reflection in the next puddle to blink out of sync with me. I wait for a quiet alien weeping to emerge from the sound of the rain. I've covered all the mirrors in my house, but it's useless. She watches me from windows, from my phone screen, from cutlery. Because a debt isn't just numbers on paper. It's a shadow that becomes a part of you, and sooner or later they come for your shadow to take what is theirs. And I've understood the most terrible truth of this story. The weeping bride is not a ghost. She is a system, an ancient, ruthless mechanism of this city that grinds down some souls to give strength to others. And you never know when you will turn from a victim into a tool. And the bill has already been presented.